The bruise on Harriet's cheek should have been just another detail Joseph ignored. Wine levels, table numbers, injuries his staff lied about. But when her eyes flinched away from his, when she angled her face toward the dusk-lit skyline behind them, the man who'd ordered executions with a nod felt something he hadn't felt in 15 years. Loss of control. Who did this to you? His voice was silk over steel, the same quiet tone he used before making people disappear. Harriet's fingers trembled as she adjusted the empty tray, the purple bruise blooming darker against her brown skin in the amber light of Sky Lotus's VIP room. Nobody, Mr. Sanderson. Her words came fast, practiced. I bumped into a shelf. Joseph stepped closer. She didn't step back. She couldn't, not without dropping the tray, not without losing the job that kept Malik's treatment going. But her whole body tensed, and that involuntary tightening of her shoulders hit him harder than any bullet he'd taken. For the first time since a 16-year-old boy was shipped from Busan to Atlanta as collateral for his father's debts, since he'd clawed his way to the top of a criminal empire using only silence and strategy, Kang Joseph Sanderson felt the ground shift beneath him. He lifted one hand, fingers that had broken bones, signed death warrants, and with impossible gentleness, tilted her chin up until the city lights caught the full damage to her face. His rose tattoo shifted above his white collar as his jaw tightened. "Don't lie to me," he whispered, and the world between them changed forever. Introduction. Harriet Cole had perfected invisibility long before she came to Sky Lotus. 26 years of being overlooked had taught her the choreography of survival. Eyes down in elevators, breath quiet around important people, body language that said, "I'm not really here." She folded herself smaller in crowded spaces, learned which doors to use and which conversations to forget. At Sky Lotus, Atlanta's most exclusive rooftop restaurant, invisibility was currency. The kind of people who dined behind those glass walls, politicians, celebrities, the beautiful and wealthy, didn't want to see the help. They wanted perfectly timed plates and instantly refilled glasses delivered by ghosts in black and white uniforms. Harriet was excellent at being a ghost. She'd been working there for 6 months, and she knew the important things. Joseph Sanderson paid better than any restaurant in the city. He never left messes. His footsteps were silent despite expensive Italian shoes. His white suits were always immaculate. The rose tattoo on his neck was rumored to mark each person he'd personally killed. And he expected his staff to be invisible. That suited Harriet just fine. She wasn't there to be seen. She was there for the $800 weekly paycheck that kept the lights on in her cramped apartment, bought Malik's medications, and slowly, painfully slowly, chipped away at the hospital bills that had been growing since her 12-year-old brother's leukemia diagnosis. She was there because Derek had smiled so sweetly when he offered to help with Malik's first treatment costs. Because that help had come with interest she couldn't pay. Because "I'll come by later to collect" had turned into bruises she covered with drugstore makeup that never quite matched her skin tone. Today's bruise was the worst yet. She'd layered on foundation 3 shades too light, the only kind the corner store carried, and pressed a cold spoon against the swelling until she had to catch the bus. Her supervisor at Sky Lotus had a zero-tolerance policy for unprofessional appearance. One call to the temp agency, and Harriet would lose everything. So she went to work. Sky Lotus was quiet when she arrived for the evening shift. The restaurant didn't open until sunset, when the floor-to-ceiling windows turned the Atlanta skyline into a glittering backdrop for proposals and power deals. The kitchen staff prepped in comfortable silence. Other servers drifted in, talking about weekend plans Harriet couldn't afford to join. She tied her apron, checked her makeup in the staff bathroom mirror, and told her reflection the same lie she'd been telling for weeks: just get through tonight. Just one more shift. The VIP room was the last section she covered during setup. Private, exclusive, separated from the main dining room by frosted glass panels. Joseph held his important meetings there, the kind where men in tailored suits discussed things that never appeared in contracts. She wasn't supposed to know what those meetings were about, but after 6 months of replacing whiskey glasses and clearing ashtrays, Harriet understood that Sky Lotus was more than a restaurant. It was a kingdom disguised as a business, and Joseph Sanderson was the kind of king who ruled through silence and reputation. She'd never been afraid of him before. He barely acknowledged the staff. A nod here, a quiet thank you there, always distant and controlled. In 6 months, she'd heard him raise his voice exactly once, when a line cook had almost caused a grease fire. But tonight, when she walked into the VIP room to set up the tables, Joseph was already there, and he was looking directly at her. This was her second double shift this week. Her feet ached in the cheap non-slip shoes she'd bought at a discount store, the kind that promised comfort but delivered blisters. The image of Malik in his hospital bed flashed through her mind, his thin arms connected to IVs, the stack of bills on her kitchen counter growing taller each week. She'd learned to move through the world without being seen, to fold herself into corners, to make staff and customers look past her and see only plates, only smiles, only the service they expected. Joseph Sanderson was usually just expensive shoes and a quiet voice, a man wrapped in rumors who owned Sky Lotus and half the city's secrets. She knew he was dangerous the way, fire burns, not from experience but from instinct and whispered warnings. Today, that careful distance shattered. Harriet. Her name on his lips stopped her mid-step. He'd never called her by name before. She raised her eyes slowly, fighting every survival instinct that screamed at her to keep her bruised cheek angled away. Look at me. It wasn't a request. Joseph Sanderson didn't make requests. When she finally met his gaze, she watched something shift in his expression, something dark and focused that made her throat tighten. He crossed the room in 3 silent strides, and suddenly he was close enough that she could smell bergamot and something sharp, something dangerous. Who did this to you? His hand lifted toward her face, then stopped, hovering, waiting for permission she didn't know how to give. I fell. The lie tasted bitter. I'm fine, Mr. Sanderson. His eyes narrowed, and the quiet in him now was more terrifying than any shout. You fell, he repeated, each syllable weighted with disbelief. And the bruises on your wrist? He nodded toward her left hand, where fingerprint-shaped marks darkened her skin despite her long sleeves. Harriet yanked her sleeve down. Mr. Sanderson, I really should finish setting up. Sit. I can't. I have tables to prep, and the other servers. I said sit. Softer this time, but no less absolute. She perched on the edge of a sleek leather chair, wrong in every way, her discount store uniform, her second-hand shoes, her damaged face in his perfect space. Joseph stood before her, hands in his pockets, studying her with an intensity that made her skin warm. Then he began listing details that made her blood run cold. You always volunteer for the last shift. You hide a sketchbook under the bar fridge, next to the extra napkins. You haven't eaten today. I can tell by the way you're standing. You leave through the back alley instead of the front entrance because you're saving bus fare. Harriet's breath caught. She thought she'd been invisible. She'd perfected the art of moving through his world without leaving a mark. The cameras see everything in Sky Lotus, Joseph said quietly, and there was something in his voice that suggested he'd seen far more than security footage. I see everything. Her mind raced through memories she'd thought were private. The night she'd cried in the walk-in freezer after the hospital called about Malik's newest treatment costs. The regulars who tipped her well and the ones who didn't, the dress designs she sketched during slow moments, dreams of a life beyond black and white uniforms and aching feet. "Who gave you that bruise, Harriet?" The gentleness in his voice nearly broke her. She wanted to tell him everything, wanted to collapse under the weight of keeping Derek's violence secret. But the words stuck in her throat because admitting the truth meant admitting she'd been weak, that she'd let a man trap her with kindness that turned into chains. "It's complicated," she whispered. "Uncomplicated." The memory rose unbidden. Malik's diagnosis, the nurse handing her the treatment estimate with sympathetic eyes, the impossible number at the bottom of the page. Then Derek, appearing like an answer to desperate prayers, offering cash with that charming smile, saying, "Don't worry about paying me back right away." Except the interest had been brutal, and when she couldn't pay, his visits became threats, his help became control, his affection became violence. "He just gets angry sometimes," she heard herself say. "But he's helping with Malik's bills, and I can't." Joseph's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath his skin. He'd seen men like Derek in his business, men who used debts as leashes, who smiled while tightening the collar. "What's his name?" "Mr. Sanderson, please. I can handle this." "What's his name?" "Harriet?" She closed her eyes. Derek Mills. He works at one of the bars in Koreatown." Something dangerous flickered across Joseph's face, recognition mixed with cold calculation. He pulled out his phone, made a call in rapid Korean, his voice dropping into a tone that made her shiver. When he hung up, he crouched in front of her chair, bringing himself to her eye level. "Whoever put their hands on you, Harriet, belongs to me now." The promise in those words was absolute, not a threat, but a statement of fact, delivered with the same certainty he used to discuss wine pairings or table reservations. She believed him completely, and that belief terrified her. "You'll finish your shift," he continued, standing smoothly, "but my head of security will be watching. You won't see him, but he'll be there." Harriet stood on unsteady legs, the ground beneath her life shifting in ways she couldn't name. She wanted to argue, to tell him she didn't need his protection, that his attention would only make things worse. But when she looked into Joseph Sanderson's eyes, she saw something that silenced every protest, not pity, not obligation, but a fierce, protective determination that made her chest tighten. She left the VIP room feeling like she was walking through water, every step requiring more effort than it should. Behind her, Joseph remained by the floor-to-ceiling windows, city lights reflecting in his dark eyes as Atlanta glittered beneath him like the kingdom it was. He was already planning, and somewhere in Koreatown, Derek Mills had no idea that his time had just run out. 3 days passed before the text came through. Harriet stared at her phone during her morning break, reading the message from Sky Lotus's manager twice to make sure she understood. "Mandatory staff training tonight, 10 p.m. All servers required. Extra pay for attendance." Tonight was supposed to be her day off, the first one in 2 weeks. She'd planned to sleep, maybe sketch a few dress designs, check on Malik during afternoon visiting hours. Her body ached for rest. But extra pay meant another week of Malik's medications covered. It meant breathing room. So at 9:45, Harriet stepped off the bus 3 blocks from Sky Lotus, her feet already protesting in her work shoes. The restaurant glowed against the night sky, but something felt wrong. No cars in the lot, no kitchen staff smoking by the service entrance, just silence and amber light bleeding through those massive windows. She pushed through the front doors and stopped. The dining room was empty, chairs stacked on tables, music playing low, something instrumental and haunting. Beyond the glass walls, Atlanta sprawled in a glittering carpet of lights, the city breathing and alive while Sky Lotus held its breath. And there, On the rooftop section visible through the interior glass partition stood Joseph Sanderson in his white suit, hands in his pockets, waiting beside a table set for two. Harriet's pulse kicked. This wasn't training. This was something else entirely. She should leave. She should turn around, walk out, text the manager that she was sick. But her feet carried her forward, through the empty dining room, up the spiral stairs to the rooftop where wind caught her hair and the city hummed below. "You came," Joseph said, and there was relief in his voice, like he'd genuinely worried she wouldn't. The text said mandatory training. Her words came out steadier than she felt. "It is. Training in VIP etiquette." He pulled out a chair, the kind of fluid gesture that came from years of practiced charm. "Sit, Harriet." She sat because refusing felt more dangerous than complying. The table was beautiful, intimate, wrong for a training session. White linens, candles protected from the wind by glass cylinders. Two place settings that looked like they cost more than her monthly rent. Joseph took the seat across from her, and for a moment they just looked at each other, the city lights reflecting in his dark eyes. "I'm going to be honest," he said quietly. "This isn't really about training." Harriet's stomach tightened. "Then what is it about?" "I wanted to see you. Away from the servers and the guests and the performance we both put on during service." He signaled toward the kitchen, and moments later, a chef she didn't recognize appeared with covered dishes. "I had Chef Min prepare something special." The covers lifted to reveal dishes she'd never seen before, vibrant colors and careful presentation that spoke of tradition and care. Steam rose, carrying scents that made her mouth water despite her nervousness. "This is japchae," Joseph explained, indicating glass noodles with vegetables. "My mother used to make it for celebrations. And this, kimchi jjigae, she made when my father came home angry. The heat would calm him down, or maybe just distract him long enough for the anger to pass." He served her small portions, explaining each dish with a reverence that transformed the meal into something sacred. Bulgogi beef that his grandmother had perfected, banchan side dishes that marked the seasons in Busan. "Your mother," Harriet ventured, picking up chopsticks with hands that had finally stopped shaking. "Does she still live in Korea?" Joseph's expression closed briefly, then opened again, like he'd made a decision to trust her. "She died when I was 14. Heart attack, but really, it was the stress. My father gambled everything we had, then everything we didn't have. He borrowed from the Korean syndicate, promised them he could pay it back with interest. He took a drink of water, his movements controlled. When he couldn't, they took me instead, 16 years old, shipped to Atlanta as collateral. I was supposed to work in their restaurants, pay off his debt with labor. Instead, I learned the business. Learned how men like my father get broken, and how men like his creditors build empires." "How did you end up owning Sky Lotus?" The question slipped out before Harriet could stop it. "I made myself useful. Then I made myself valuable. Then I made myself dangerous enough that killing me would cost more than keeping me alive." His smile was sharp, humorless. "Sky Lotus is the respectable face I wear. The other businesses, the ones that happen in shadows, those pay for everything you see here." Harriet should be afraid. She should be running. Instead, she found herself sharing pieces of her own story, the words flowing easier than they ever had. She told him about her dream of designing clothes, real clothes for real bodies, uniforms that didn't assume all women were built like mannequins. She told him about Malik's basketball dreams, how he'd sleep with his shoes on the hospital bed because he was convinced he'd get better in time for tryouts. "Watching you move through the dining room," Joseph said suddenly, his voice low, "is the only time my world feels quiet." The confession hung between them, fragile and dangerous. Their hands brushed when he passed her chopsticks. The contact lasted half a second, but electricity shot up Harriet's arm. Wind tugged at her hair, pulling strands loose from her bun, and Joseph reached across the table with infinite care, tucking them behind her ear while carefully avoiding the fading bruise on her cheek. "I should go," Harriet whispered, but she didn't move. "You should," Joseph agreed, but his eyes said, "Stay." The air felt charged, heavy with words neither of them was ready to speak. Harriet was drawn to him in ways that terrified her, not because he was dangerous, but because caring about him meant risking everything. She didn't want to be the boss's girl, didn't want charity or protection bought with blood money. She wanted control over her own life. Joseph seemed to understand without her saying it. He didn't lean in for a kiss, didn't push for more than this moment of honesty over Korean food and city lights. But the wanting was there, crackling between them like static before a storm. It was nearly midnight when Harriet finally stood to leave. Joseph walked her down to the main floor, their footsteps echoing in the empty restaurant. At the service entrance, he stopped. "My driver can take you home. I'll take the bus. It's fine." "Harriet, I need to do this myself," she said firmly. "Please." He nodded, but something in his expression said he didn't like it. She slipped out the door into the alley, the cool night air hitting her face as reality rushed back. What had she just done? Shared a meal with a criminal. Started falling for the most dangerous man in Atlanta. She was halfway down the alley when Derek stepped from the shadows. His smile was charming, the same one he'd used when they first met, but his eyes were cold. "There's my girl. Been looking for you." Harriet's blood turned to ice. "I'm not your girl. You are until you pay me back every cent." He moved closer, and she instinctively stepped back, her spine hitting the brick wall. "With interest." "I don't have it, Derek. I told you." His hand shot out, gripping her wrist exactly where the bruises from before hadn't quite faded. Pain bloomed sharp and immediate. "Then get it. Sky Lotus has a register. You work late shifts alone sometimes. I'm sure you can figure something out. I'm not stealing from my job. The people I owe are worse than cancer, Harriet. They don't wait for treatment plans or payment schedules. They just take." His smile widened, cruel and calculated. "Speaking of which, Malik's at Grady Memorial, right? Room 412. Funny how easy it is to walk into hospitals, how distracted nurses get during shift changes." Terror shot through her. "Don't you dare." "Then get me my money." He shoved her harder against the wall, his forearm across her shoulders, pressure on the bruise he'd left before. $2,000 by Friday, or I visit your baby brother." "I can't get that much in 3 days." "Not my problem." Derek released her abruptly and stepped back, smoothing his jacket like nothing had happened. "Friday, Harriet. Don't make me remind you what happens when I don't get what I'm owed." He walked away whistling, hands in his pockets, leaving her shaking against the wall. Harriet didn't see the security camera mounted above the dumpster, its red light blinking steadily in the darkness. But inside Sky Lotus, Joseph saw everything. He stood in the security office with his head of security, both of them watching the footage replay on multiple screens, watching Derek grab her, watching him threaten her, watching him put his hands on what Joseph had already decided belonged under his protection. "Find everything about him," Joseph said, his voice empty of emotion, which made it more terrifying than rage. "Where he works, where he lives, who he owes, how much he owes, every detail." "Yes, sir." "And bring him to me." Joseph's jaw tightened as he watched Harriet slide down the wall on screen, watched her cry into her hands when she thought no one could see. Not in an alley, not in some back room, in the dining room, during peak service. His head of security's eyes widened. "Sir, that's public." "I know." Joseph turned from the screens, his white suit immaculate, his expression carved from ice. I want everyone to see what happens when someone touches what's mine. He walked out onto the dark restaurant floor, past tables that would soon be full of Atlanta's elite, past windows that reflected his solitary figure against the sleeping city. In 3 days, Derek Mills would learn that some debts got paid in ways far worse than money. And the whole city would watch. If this story made you feel something, maybe it deserves to reach someone else who needs to feel it too. Friday night at Sky Lotus was always chaos dressed in elegance. The dining room pulsed with energy. Live jazz from a quartet in the corner mixed with the clink of crystal glasses and the low hum of Atlanta's elite making deals over $30 appetizers. Influencers posed by the floor-to-ceiling windows, capturing the city lights as backdrop for their curated lives. Reservation lists ran 3 months deep. Every table was full. Harriet moved through it all like a ghost, balancing trays and forcing smiles while her mind replayed the alley confrontation on an endless loop. $2,000 by tonight. Malik's hospital room number, spoken like a threat. Derek's hand on her wrist, on her bruise, on her life. She'd considered running, considered grabbing Malik from Grady Memorial and disappearing into a city big enough to swallow them both. But running required money she didn't have, and Malik's treatment required consistency she couldn't provide on the run. So she worked her shift and tried to pretend her world wasn't collapsing. Joseph stood on the mezzanine overlooking the dining room, unusually still in his white suit, a ghost king surveying his kingdom. Harriet caught him watching her twice, his expression unreadable, and each time her stomach twisted with something between hope and terror. He knew about the alley. She was certain of it now. The question was what he planned to do about it. The answer came at 8:37 p.m. The front doors slammed open with enough force to crack the decorative glass panel. Conversations died mid-sentence as 2 men in dark suits dragged Derek Mills into the restaurant. He fought against their grip, expensive shoes scraping marble floors, his charming smile replaced with panic and rage. Get your hands off me! This is illegal! I'll have you arrested for kidnapping! Every head in the dining room turned. Phones came out. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through grass. Harriet's tray slipped from her numb fingers, glasses shattering against the floor, in an explosion of sound that made her flinch. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. Joseph descended the spiral staircase with the calm of a man who'd orchestrated executions, each step precise and unhurried. The rose tattoo on his neck seemed darker against his skin, his white suit immaculate under the chandelier lights. When he reached the center of the dining room, he nodded once. His men forced Derek to his knees. What is this? Derek's voice cracked, losing its confident edge. You can't just drag people into restaurants like some kind of mob boss. Can't I? Joseph's voice was soft, conversational, but it carried to every corner of the suddenly silent room. He pulled a tablet from his inside jacket pocket and crouched in front of Derek, angling the screen so only they could see. Let me show you something interesting. He pressed play. Security footage from the alley behind Sky Lotus filled the screen. Derek grabbing Harriet, Derek shoving her against the wall, Derek threatening Malik. The audio was crystal clear, every word of extortion and violence preserved in digital permanence. Derek's face went pale. Joseph stood, turning to address the room with the practiced ease of a man used to commanding attention. This man assaulted my employee, extorted her for money she didn't have, threatened her 12-year-old brother, currently undergoing cancer treatment. He paused, letting the words sink in. He thought he could touch what's mine and walk away. She begged me for help, Derek shouted, desperation making him reckless. I lent her money for her brother, and she refuses to pay me back. I'm the victim here." Joseph's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. He gestured to one of his men, who produced a printed document and a pen. "You have a choice, Derek Mills. You can sign this confession admitting to assault and extortion against Harriet Cole, or you can leave through the back entrance, and I promise you won't be walking when you do." The threat hung in the air, polite and absolute. Around them, the restaurant held its breath. A woman in diamonds whispered to her husband, "He's Mafia. I told you this place was a front." A server Harriet recognized, a girl named Maya, with fading bruises on her own arms, had tears streaming down her face. Phones were everywhere now, recording, streaming, immortalizing this moment for an audience far beyond Sky Lotus's walls. Harriet stood frozen between tables, every eye in the room flicking between her bruised face and the man on his knees. She felt exposed, dissected, turned into a cautionary tale or a romance trope depending on who was filming. This was supposed to be protection, but it felt like drowning in spotlight. Derek's hands shook as he took the pen. His signature was barely legible, defeated scratches across expensive paper. Joseph collected the document with clinical precision, then turned to face the room one final time. "If anyone in this city thinks they can lay hands on my staff, understand, this is the mild version of my response." His voice was quiet, almost gentle, which made the threat infinitely more terrifying. For a long beat, no one moved. Forks hovered mid-air. Conversations died half-formed. Even the jazz quartet had stopped playing, the silence so complete that Harriet could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. What he did next left everyone silent. Then, like a spell breaking, the whispers started. Phones tilted for better angles. The influencers who'd been photographing their meals were now documenting something far more viral. Joseph's men escorted Derek out through the service entrance. The dining room slowly returned to life, but the energy had changed. Every glance toward Harriet carried weight now, curiosity or pity or fascination. She turned and walked toward the kitchen, needing air, needing space, needing anywhere but here. By midnight, the clips had spread like wildfire across social media. TikTok, Instagram, Twitter. The video showed up everywhere with captions that ranged from romantic to horrified. Atlanta restaurant CEO or Mafia king? He did this for his waitress? Korean boss publicly destroys abuser. The view counts climbed into millions. By morning, the police were involved. Derek Mills filed a report claiming kidnapping and forced confession. He spun a story about a seductress waitress who manipulated her powerful boss into attacking an innocent man. Tabloids picked it up. Think pieces appeared questioning Joseph's business practices. And 2 detectives showed up outside Sky Lotus after Harriet's next shift. "Miss Cole, we'd like to ask you some questions." They were polite but persistent, backing her into the alley where Derek had cornered her days before. They asked about her relationship with Joseph Sanderson. They hinted at money laundering, suggested she might be complicit in organized crime. They mentioned Malik's medical bills with careful emphasis, implying they might look more closely at where that funding came from. "Are you sleeping with your boss, Miss Cole?" The question hit like a slap. Harriet's hands curled into fists. "No. But he did assault a man on your behalf. That suggests a certain level of intimacy. He protected me from someone who was threatening my brother. Or he used you as an excuse to publicly display power. Either way, you're caught in something dangerous." The detective's expression was almost sympathetic. "We're trying to help you here." But Harriet saw the trap clearly. Joseph's protection had painted a target on her back, made her visible in the worst possible way. The police wanted her testimony against him. The media wanted her story. Everyone wanted a piece of the waitress who'd caught a mafia boss's attention. She said nothing more without a lawyer and walked away on shaking legs. That night, she stormed into Joseph's office without knocking. He stood by his window overlooking the city, still in his white suit despite the late hour. He turned when she entered, something hopeful flickering in his expression that died when he saw her face. "You turned me into a spectacle." Her voice cracked with fury and exhaustion. "You made a show out of my pain for your ego and your reputation. I protected you. You made it worse. The police think I'm your accomplice. Derek is playing victim, and half the city believes him. My brother's medical funding is under investigation, and everyone at Sky Lotus looks at me like I'm either your mistress or your puppet." Joseph stepped toward her, hands rising in a placating gesture. "I would rather the whole city fear me than let another man put his hands on you. That wasn't your choice to make. You deserve someone who won't look away from your bruises, Harriet. Someone who will stop them before they happen." "And what happens when you're the one who hurts me?" The words burst out before she could stop them. "You scare me more than Derek ever did, Joseph. Because if I fall for you, I lose everything. My job, my safety, maybe even Malik if the police decide I'm tied up in whatever empire you've built in the shadows." The admission hung between them, raw and honest. She was falling for him, and it terrified her more than any threat Derek had made. Joseph went very still, his carefully controlled expression cracking to show something vulnerable beneath. "Harriet, I need time. I need space. I need to figure out how to protect my brother without becoming collateral damage in your war." She expected him to argue, to use that quiet authority that made people obey without question. Instead, Joseph stepped back, hands falling to his sides. "Okay." The single word felt like surrender. Harriet left his office, left Sky Lotus, left the man who'd tried to save her by destroying someone else. Behind her, Joseph stood alone by the window, the restaurant sprawling dark and empty beneath him. For the first time in 15 years, the king of Sky Lotus had chosen not to force an outcome, and the silence felt like death. Sometimes the hardest stories to walk away from are the ones that remind us why we stay. 3 days without Harriet, and Sky Lotus felt like a mausoleum. Joseph moved through his restaurant like a ghost haunting his own empire. The dining room still filled each night with Atlanta's elite. Glasses still clinked, deals still closed over expensive wine. But the food tasted like ash in his mouth. The music grated instead of soothed. Everything felt wrong in ways he couldn't articulate, but couldn't ignore. He replayed the security footage obsessively. The bruise on her cheek, Derek's hand on her wrist, her walking out of his office with tears in her eyes. Each clip cut deeper than the last, until Joseph understood what he'd been too blind to see before. He'd been using power as a reflex, not as a choice. For 15 years, violence had been his first language. Someone threatened what was his, he destroyed them. Someone crossed a line, he erased them. It was simple, effective, and utterly empty. He'd become the same kind of monster who'd shipped a 16-year-old boy across an ocean as payment for his father's sins. The bruise on Harriet's face had cracked something open inside him, but his response had been pure instinct. Drag Derek into the light, make him kneel. Show the city what happened to men who touched Joseph's people. He'd thought he was protecting her. Instead, he'd turned her pain into theater. Joseph canceled his meetings with syndicate leaders, men who'd been waiting weeks for his attention. He snapped at his lieutenants over minor mistakes he would have normally ignored. He spent hours on the rooftop, where they'd shared Korean food and honesty, staring at the empty table and wondering if he'd destroyed the only real thing he'd ever had. On the third night, he made a decision that would either save him or end him. Harriet ground through her shifts at a diner across town, taking any hours they'd give her. The pay was terrible, the customers worse, but at least nobody whispered when she walked past. At least nobody filmed her or asked if she was sleeping with the boss. Sky Lotus felt like a lifetime ago, even though it had only been 3 days. The other servers gossiped about the viral video during smoke breaks. Some called it romantic, others called it terrifying. Harriet called it the reason she'd never go back. But Malik had questions she couldn't answer. "Who's the man in the white suit?" he asked during her afternoon visit to Grady Memorial, his tablet playing one of the countless clips circulating online. "The one who made that guy apologize to you?" Harriet's throat tightened. "Just my old boss. He looks like he cares about you." Malik's voice was soft, hopeful in the way only 12-year-olds facing their own mortality could be. Like really cares. "It's complicated, Molly. Adults always say that when they're scared." The truth of it hit her like a punch. She was scared. Scared of Joseph's world. Scared of losing Malik to police investigations or rival criminals. Scared of falling for a man whose first instinct was violence wrapped in protection. That night, Harriet made her own decision. She'd go to Sky Lotus one last time, hand over her uniform, apologize for the chaos she'd brought, and walk away clean. Malik's safety required distance from Joseph Sanderson and everything he represented. She arrived at 4 p.m. before the dinner service began, planning to slip in through the service entrance and avoid the awkwardness of a public goodbye. Instead, she found the entire staff gathered in the dining room. Servers, bartenders, kitchen staff, security, everyone stood in a loose semicircle facing the center of the room where Joseph waited. He wasn't on the mezzanine where he usually observed from safe distance. He stood on their level, still in his immaculate white suit, but there were shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there a week ago. He looked tired. He looked human. Harriet froze in the doorway, her resignation letter folded in her pocket. Joseph's eyes found hers across the room, and something passed between them, fragile and desperate. Then he turned to address the gathered staff. "Thank you all for coming early. I have announcements that couldn't wait." His voice was steady, but there was an edge of vulnerability Harriet had never heard before. "I'm selling off a portion of my business interests, the parts that operate in shadows, the parts that brought police attention to this restaurant and danger to people I care about. Sky Lotus will become the legitimate center of everything I build going forward." Shocked whispers rippled through the crowd. Joseph Sanderson didn't explain himself. He didn't apologize. He certainly didn't admit weakness. Until now. "I'm also creating a foundation under Sky Lotus's name. It will pay medical bills for staff, families, and local kids who need help. Real help. Not loans with interest. Not favors that come with strings, just help." He paused, and his eyes found Harriet again. "I owe someone here an apology. Harriet Cole, I turned your pain into a warning to my enemies. I made a spectacle of your trauma for my ego and my reputation. That was for me, not you. I'm sorry." The dining room fell silent. Maya, the server with fading bruises, was crying openly. Others looked stunned, like they were watching a statue learn to bleed. Harriet's letter felt like fire in her pocket. "Harriet will head the foundation's outreach and design work," Joseph continued, his voice gaining strength. "She'll manage how the money is distributed, who it helps, what conditions come with it. She'll also redesign our uniforms and branding to reflect who we want to be, not who we've been. I'm offering her not just a position, but agency over something that matters." Every head turned toward Harriet. She felt exposed again, but this time it was different. Joseph wasn't making decisions for her. He was offering her power to make her own. She walked through the crowd, feeling their eyes follow her, until she stood facing Joseph in the center of the dining room. "Is this guilt talking?" Her voice was quiet but steady. "Mafia penance?" "It's me realizing I don't want to be the kind of man who uses power as a weapon anymore, at least not against people who don't deserve it." "What happens when your old world pushes back, when the syndicate decides you're weak for going legitimate?" Joseph's jaw tightened. "Then I deal with it. But I won't deal with it by putting you in the crossfire again." Harriet studied his face, searching for lies and finding only exhaustion and hope. "I need to think about this. Alone." "The rooftop is empty," Joseph said quietly. "If you want space to think." She nodded and turned toward the spiral staircase. After a moment, she heard his footsteps behind her. They climbed in silence, past the empty dining room, up to where Atlanta sprawled beneath them in afternoon light. The city looked different during the day, less romantic, more real. Traffic and construction and the messy business of people living their lives. "I don't know how to love without breaking things," Joseph admitted, standing by the railing where they'd shared Korean food and secrets. "But I want to learn, with you, because of you." Harriet turned to face him. "Why me? You could have anyone." "The bruise made me realize I'd become like the men who hurt my mother in Korea, men who thought power meant control, who measured worth in fear and obedience. When I saw what Derek did to you, I saw what I'd been doing to everyone else for 15 years. He stepped closer, careful not to crowd her. "Choosing you over my empire is the first real choice I've made for myself since I was 16. "I have conditions," Harriet said, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. "Honesty about your dangers. No decisions about my life without my consent. And Malik's safety comes first, always. If your world threatens him, I walk." "Agreed." "I'm serious, Joseph. I won't be your project or your redemption arc. If we do this, it has to be real." He didn't reach for her, didn't try to seal the deal with a kiss or a grand gesture. Instead, he said the words she needed to hear. "Stay. Build this with me. Make me better or walk away, but don't disappear." Harriet looked at the man who'd terrified and protected her, who'd made her visible in the worst and best ways possible. She thought about Malik asking who the man in the white suit was. She thought about Maya crying at the announcement of the foundation. She thought about all the ways people broke and healed and sometimes did both at once. "We can try," she said finally, "but this has to be real." It will be. And for the first time since the bruise appeared on her cheek, Harriet believed him. 6 months later, Sky Lotus had transformed into something Atlanta couldn't quite categorize. The viral videos still circulated, but new clips joined them now. Harriet, speaking at a fundraiser for the foundation, her voice steady and strong. Joseph standing slightly behind her in his white suit, rose tattoo visible above his collar, letting her be the face of their shared vision. The foundation paid medical bills for 17 families in its first quarter. Malik walked into Sky Lotus wearing a suit Harriet had designed, officially in remission, to celebrate his 13th birthday. The restaurant's reputation shifted from mob front to mysterious success story. People still whispered about Joseph's past, but they whispered about his transformation too. Harriet caught her reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows one evening during service. No bruise marked her cheek, no fear shadowed her eyes. Just a woman standing beside a man who'd chosen to change, who'd chosen her, who'd learned that real power meant knowing when not to use it. "I still regret not stopping that first bruise," Joseph murmured beside her, watching the dining room fill with guests and laughter. Harriet smiled, taking his hand. "You did stop it, and you stopped the last one." For the first time in years, she believed the world could stay silent, not out of fear, but because it was finally listening. The best endings are the ones we share with people who need to hear them, so maybe don't keep this one to yourself.